Carl McCunn was an American wildlife photographer who set out on a solo journey to the remote wilderness of Alaska in 1981, hoping to capture breathtaking photographs of the wildlife and landscapes in the area. He planned to spend several months living in a tent, away from the noise and distractions of civilization. McCunn classed himself as a skilled outdoorsman who had experience in wilderness survival, and he was confident that he could handle anything that nature threw his way. However, McCunn's journey ended in tragedy months later when he became stranded and forgotten about. Now, McCunn is remembered, but not for his photography or his daring expeditions, but due to becoming the subject of one of the most infamous wilderness survival stories of all time. This is the tragic story of Carl McCunn. Carl was born to parents Donovan McCunn and Erika Hess in Munich, Germany on the 25th of January 1947. Although born in Germany, due to his father who was in the United States Army being stationed there, he was raised and grew up in San Antonio, Texas. Unfortunately, not much at all is known about McCunn's childhood, but by the time he graduated from high school in 1964, he was described as being 6 feet 2, weighing 240 pounds, he had curly hair and a warm, friendly personality. McCunn briefly worked in the United States Army before being discharged in 1969. He then moved to Seattle before moving to Anchorage, Alaska in 1970. Something had always drawn McCunn to Alaska, and there are various reasons for this. Alaska in the early 1970s was still a rugged and untamed wilderness, with vast stretches of unspoiled forests, mountains, and rivers. It was a place where the beauty and the harshness of nature intertwined, and where survival skills were essential for anyone who ventured into its remote regions, and, to be honest, it still is today. As a Brit, I have always dreamed of going to Alaska. There is just something incredible about how unspoiled it is and continues to be. However, compared to now, Alaska was much less developed back in the day, with fewer roads, fewer people, and fewer amenities. The state's population was small, and most people lived in major cities, such as Anchorage, which is where McCunn lived. Despite the challenges of living in Alaska, many people were drawn to its wild beauty and opportunities for adventure. Hunters and fishermen came to test their skills against the state's abundant wildlife, while adventurers sought out the remote corners of the state to explore its rugged terrain. Alaska was a place where people could truly get away from it all and immerse themselves in nature, and this is exactly what McCunn wanted. McCunn survived by doing odd jobs, but his main passion was wildlife photography. In 1976, Carl had lived remotely for 5 months in Brook Range, doing wildlife photography, and this was a successful trip by all means. He considered himself as an experienced outdoorsman, and enjoyed spending long times on his own connecting with nature and photographing animals. 5 years after his first solo trip, he decided to do another, but looking back in hindsight, he was doomed from the very start. In the month of March 1981, Carl McCunn chartered a bush pilot to transport him to a desolate, unnamed lake in an unnamed valley situated roughly 225 miles northeast of Fairbanks, Alaska. He had planned to stay for 5 months. McCunn believed that he had arranged for a pilot friend to pick him up in August, but it appeared that he had not confirmed this plan with his friend. McCunn had enlisted the services of a bush pilot to fly him in, but he was relying on his friend to pick him up, as he did not have enough money to pay for the return trip by the bush pilot. However, McCunn never actually made these plans clear to his friend. In fact, his friend had little clue about his plans at all. His pilot friend also noted to McCunn that he may be working in August and not to count on him to pick him up. Obviously, McCunn didn't listen or heard different. So with the intention of capturing the awe-inspiring natural landscapes of the Alaskan tundra, Carl McCunn packed 500 rolls of film and an array of photography equipment for his camping trip. In addition, he brought along 2 guns and 1,400 pounds of provisions, mostly consisting of rice and beans to sustain him for the duration of his trip. He also kept a journal in which he would write in most days. In the initial entries of his journal, McCunn expressed the observations of the seasonal migration of animals to their summer habitats, and remarked, "It's remarkable how humans are so disconnected from their modern-day environment in a place like this." He was fascinated with the birds, especially loons, which is a rare species of bird predominantly found in Alaska. In the early days of his trip, Carl threw a good amount of his ammo into the lake. He did this as he thought the amount he had brought was excessive, and he felt like, in his own words, a warmonger. Fast forward to August, McCunn had been living out there for 5 months. He had survived off his provisions, but they were now running low, and temperatures were starting to fall. But no problem, right? It was August. Carl was going to be picked up any day and return home. Except, this isn't what happened. By the time August arrived, Carl had begun to second-guess himself. An excerpt from his journal stated, "I think I should have used more foresight about arranging my departure. I'll soon find out." He was right to have these concerns. A few days into August passed, and nobody arrived to pick him up. Carl waited and waited, but there was no sign of salvation. By mid-August, the seriousness of the situation was becoming apparent, and his anxiety grew. He wrote, "Come on, please, don't leave me hanging and fretting like this. I didn't come out here for that." Carl's food was now running dangerously low, so in order to preserve it, he began shooting ducks and game, and drying the meat off animals that had died in the lake. The weather was still warmish, but the rain was becoming a problem. Carl was still semi-hopeful that someone back home would send help. He had given a map of the area to his friends and father, but his father stated that Carl didn't exactly say where he would be in this area. He didn't say when he would return, and he told him that if he wasn't back by August, not to be worried, because he may have chosen to stay longer if the trip was going well. To give more context into why his father didn't call for help, Carl had returned late from his last trip in 1976. Because he was back late, his father was obviously worried and called the police. Carl was then found, and he asked his father not to do this again. Nevertheless, he wrote in his journal, "Certainly someone in town should have figured something must be wrong. Me not being back by now. But then again, there's probably no one in town that gives a fuck. What in the hell do those people think I gave them maps of my camp location for? Decoration?" Little did McCunn know, some of his friends were worried about him, and informed Alaska State Troopers to check on him in late August. Pilot David Hamilton flew out to McCunn. As you can imagine, he was obviously very relieved when he saw the pilot. However, the pilot failed to detect any signs of distress exhibited by McCunn, as the latter waved his orange bag in a nonchalant manner. Furthermore, during the pilot's third flyover of the campsite, he observed McCunn walking back to his tent in an equally relaxed manner. Consequently, the state trooper thought that McCunn wasn't in any kind of need of assistance. Meanwhile, on the ground, when McCunn saw the plane, he was thrilled and relieved. However, it wasn't till after the plane flew away, he realised that he had made a grave mistake. In his diary, he wrote, "I recall raising my right hand, shoulder high, and shaking my fist on the plane's second pass. It was a little cheer, like when your team scored a touchdown or something. Turns out, that's the signal for, all okay, do not wait. Man, I can't believe it. It's certainly my fault that I'm here now. Man, I can't believe it. I feel like a real klutz. Now I know why nobody's shown up from that incident." He went on to say, "Unfortunately, the airplane was on wheels and couldn't land, so I stopped waving after its first pass. I then got busy packing things up and getting ready to break camp. As sunset approached, I began to doubt if the pilot took me seriously. McCunn had blew his only chance of escape." Time went by, food became more scarce, and the weather was becoming colder. Now Carl was not only fighting against the weather, but with the wild animals fighting for food. As time progressed, the weather took a turn for the worse, and the lake gradually froze over due to the onset of snowfall. The situation worsened further as the availability of game dwindled, prompting McCunn to set up snares to catch rabbits. However, his efforts were often foiled by wolves and foxes that frequently pilfered the traps. As November approached, McCunn found himself with no food, but what still baffles many to this day is the fact that McCunn was told by the bush pilot who dropped him off there was a hunting cabin 5 miles away from his campsite. Why Carl didn't decide to walk there when the weather got colder is still unknown. Carl did think about walking 75 miles to Fort Yukon, but at this point he was weak, and the weather was too harsh. He had simply waited too long. He now had frostbite, and wrote of having dizzy spells and delusions. In his journal he wrote, "I'm frightened my end is near. If things get too miserable, I've always got a bullet around. But think I'm too chicken for that. Besides, that may be the only sin I've never committed." This was a terrifying foreshadowing of his future. By December, he was barely hanging on. He had used the rest of his fuel and could no longer light a fire. In his diary, he wrote, "If my body has been eaten on, or if it turns out I take my own life, just put me under a tree so I can at least make a decent meal for some critter. I don't want my family to see me that way. They'll be hurt enough as it is. Should I crazily attempt walking out in my condition and am nowhere to be found, please carry out the above will. I kindly thank whoever may do so. The idea is me, Natch." He then went on to write his final excerpt, which read, "I'm burning the last of my emergency Coleman light, and just fed the fire the last of my split wood. When the ashes cool, I'll be cooling along with them. I chickened out once already, but I don't want to go through the chills again. They say it doesn't hurt." McCunn then loaded his gun, and well, you know what happens next. Friends reported McCunn missing on January the 19th, but due to harsh weather, authorities couldn't fly out until January the 26th. A state trooper found McCunn's campsite during a flyover that day. Several troopers arrived on February the 2nd, 1982 to inspect the tent. After opening it, they found McCunn's frozen body, along with his diary spanning 100 pages. McCunn's story serves as a cautionary tale of the dangers of underestimating the Alaskan wilderness and the importance of adequate preparation when venturing into remote areas. His tragic end is a reminder that nature can be unforgiving, and we must respect its power and prepare ourselves accordingly. As I stated earlier, I have always been interested in Alaska. I find the place pretty fascinating, and I've been meaning to cover this story for a while now, so I hope I did it justice and you guys enjoyed it. If I have any viewers located in Alaska, please let me know below, because I would love to see. As always, let me know what you think about Carl's story. Leave a like, take care, and I will see you in the next one. Cheers.